Hey everyone, before we dive into this gripping tale, please hit that subscribe button and join our channel for more thrilling stories like this one. Your support keeps these narratives coming. I sat at the head of the polished mahogany table in the boardroom, the city skyline sprawling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. My secretary, Claire, had left a stack of memos on my desk earlier that morning. One caught my eye, a single line scrawled in her precise handwriting. "He'll be fired soon." No context, no name, just those 4 words staring up at me. The boardroom was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I held the memo in my hand, its weight heavier than paper should be. Who was he? Why was Claire so cryptic? My mind raced through the possibilities as the clock ticked toward the start of the meeting. The board members would arrive soon, and I needed answers. I glanced at the door, half expecting Claire to walk in with an explanation. She didn't. The memo felt like a warning, but from whom and for whom? I tucked it into my pocket, my fingers brushing the edge of the paper. This wasn't just office gossip, it was something bigger. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. The boardroom filled slowly, each member taking their seat with the usual mix of confidence and posturing. I watched their faces, searching for a hint of guilt or knowledge. Did one of them know about the memo? Was he sitting in this room? Claire had been with me for years, her loyalty unquestioned until now. Her note wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and let my eyes drift to the memo again, now hidden in my pocket. The meeting's agenda sat in front of me, but my focus was elsewhere. Who had Claire overheard? What had prompted her to write those words? I thought about her desk, just outside my office, where she heard everything. Every whispered deal, every heated argument. She was the gatekeeper of secrets, but this was the first time she'd shared one so openly. I scanned the room again, my suspicion growing. Someone here was on borrowed time, and I needed to find out who. The meeting began, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in Claire's cryptic message. The CEO, Richard, droned on about quarterly projections, his voice a steady monotone. I studied him. Was he the one? His arrogance had rubbed people the wrong way lately, but firing him would shake the company to its core. My fingers tapped the memo in my pocket, the words burning into my thoughts. Claire wasn't prone to exaggeration, she was meticulous, almost surgical in her precision. If she wrote, soon, she meant it. I glanced at the others. Margaret, the CFO, with her sharp eyes. Tom, the head of marketing, always too eager to please. Could it be one of them? The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I caught myself staring at the memo again, its edges crumpling under my grip. I needed to confront Claire, but not yet. Not until I had more to go on. The meeting dragged on, but all I could think about was who was marked for the axe. By the time Richard finished his presentation, I was barely listening. The memo was a puzzle, and I was missing pieces. I thought about Claire's routine. She arrived early, left late, and knew the company's pulse better than anyone. Why hadn't she just told me in person? Was she afraid of being overheard? I glanced at the glass walls of the boardroom, transparent but soundproof. Secrets didn't travel far here, unless someone wanted them to. I wondered if Claire was protecting herself by writing instead of speaking. The board members were now discussing budget cuts, their voices rising in debate. I stayed quiet, observing. If he was in this room, someone else might know something. A glance, a hesitation, anything could be a clue. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket, but I ignored it. Claire's note was my focus. I needed to figure out who he was before the news broke. The meeting broke for a coffee break, and I slipped out to find Claire. Her desk was empty, her computer screen dark. A sticky note on her monitor read, "Back in 10. Typical Claire, always precise, even in her absence. I stood there, the memo burning a hole in my pocket. I wanted to search her desk, but that felt like a betrayal. Instead, I returned to the boardroom, my thoughts spiraling. The other executives mingled, their laughter forced and their eyes darting. I watched Tom closely. He'd been quieter than usual today. Was he nervous? Or was I reading too much into it? The memo had me second-guessing everyone. Claire's absence gnawed at me. Where was she? I pulled out the memo again, rereading those 4 words. He'll be fired soon. No signature, no date, just cold certainty. I needed to talk to her, and I needed to do it now. Back in the boardroom, the meeting resumed, but my attention was fractured. I kept glancing at the door, expecting Claire to walk in. She didn't. The discussion turned to restructuring, and I caught Margaret's eye. She looked away too quickly. Did she know something? I was starting to see conspiracies everywhere. The memo was turning me into someone I didn't recognize, paranoid and hypervigilant. I forced myself to focus on the conversation, but Claire's words echoed in my head. Who had she overheard? Was it a board member, a rival, or someone higher up? Richard was still talking, oblivious to my distraction. I wondered if he sensed the tension in the room. The memo felt like a ticking bomb, and I was the only one who could hear it. I needed to find Claire before the meeting ended, before soon became now. The clock on the wall showed 11:45 a.m. The meeting was nearly over. I hadn't spoken much, and no one seemed to notice. My silence wasn't unusual. I often let the others talk themselves out before weighing in. But today, my quiet was different, heavy with suspicion. I thought about Claire's loyalty again. She'd never given me reason to doubt her, so why this cryptic note? Was she trying to warn me about something bigger than a firing? I glanced at the memo again, its edges now soft from my constant handling. The board members were wrapping up, scheduling the next meeting. I nodded along, my mind elsewhere. Claire's desk would be my next stop, whether she was there or not. I needed answers, and I wasn't leaving without them. The memo was a thread, and I was determined to pull it until the truth unraveled. As the boardroom emptied, I lingered, pretending to review my notes. The memo was still in my pocket, its words seared into my memory. I thought about the company's recent struggles, missed targets, client complaints, whispers of a takeover. Could the firing be tied to that? Was he a scapegoat for larger problems? I stood and paced the room, the city below indifferent to my turmoil. Claire's absence was starting to feel deliberate. Had she left the memo and then made herself scarce? I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. The office was quieter now, the post-meeting chatter fading. I headed to Claire's desk again, my steps quickening. If she wasn't there, I'd wait. The memo wasn't just a note, it was a signal, and I needed to know what it meant. Claire's desk was still empty, but her coat was draped over her chair. She hadn't left the building. I scanned her workspace, neat, organized, no clues. The sticky note still read back in 10, but it had been longer than that. My frustration grew, but so did my determination. I sat in her chair, feeling like an intruder. The memo was in my hand again, its words taunting me. He'll be fired soon. I thought about the board members, their faces, their habits. Tom's nervous energy, Margaret's quick glance, Richard's smug confidence. Any of them could be the target. Or none of them. I needed Claire to explain, to fill in the blanks. The office was too quiet, the silence amplifying my unease. I stood, ready to search for her, when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Claire. She froze when she saw me at her desk, her eyes widening for a split second before she composed herself. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. I held up the memo, watching her reaction. She didn't flinch, but her lips pressed into a thin line. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice low. She nodded, glancing around the empty office. "Not here," she whispered, motioning toward my office. I followed her, the memo clenched in my fist. The boardroom was behind us, but its secrets felt closer than ever. Claire closed my office door and turned to face me. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My pulse quickened. "Who's he?" I asked. She hesitated, and in that moment, I knew this was bigger than I'd imagined. Claire sat across from me in my office, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The memo lay on the desk between us, a silent accusation. "I overheard a conversation," she began, her voice measured. "In the executive lounge, 2 days ago." She wouldn't meet my eyes, and that alone set me on edge. I leaned forward, urging her to continue. "It was Richard and someone from the board. Margaret, I think." My mind flashed back to the boardroom, Margaret's quick glance away. Claire went on, explaining how she'd been restocking the lounge when she heard them whispering. "They didn't know I was there," she said. "They were talking about a firing, someone high up." I pressed her for a name, but she shook her head. "They didn't say who, just he and soon." The memo's words stared up at me, mocking my confusion. I asked Claire why she didn't tell me directly. She sighed, her composure cracking. "I wasn't sure what to do," she admitted. "I didn't want to start a panic, but I couldn't ignore it." She'd written the memo in a rush, slipping it onto my desk before she could second-guess herself. I studied her face. Fear, yes, but also resolve. Claire wasn't one to act impulsively, which made this all the more unsettling. "What else did you hear?" I asked. She hesitated again, then described snippets. Talk of a restructuring, a power shift, someone being made an example. My stomach churned. Was this about office politics or something deeper? I thought of the boardroom, the faces around the table. Someone was being targeted, and Claire's memo was the only clue I had. I sent Claire back to her desk with a promise to keep this between us. The memo stayed with me, its edges now frayed from my constant handling. I sat alone in my office, piecing together what she'd told me. Richard and Margaret, whispering in the lounge. A firing, a power shift. It sounded like a coup, but against whom? I pulled up the company org chart on my computer, scanning the names of the executive team. Richard, Margaret, Tom, a dozen others, all men in the he category. I ruled out myself, or at least hoped I could. The memo's ambiguity was maddening. I needed more information, but confronting Richard or Margaret directly would tip my hand. I had to be strategic, play the game they were playing. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and emails, but the memo was never far from my thoughts. I kept it in my pocket, a constant reminder of the storm brewing. By late afternoon, I noticed Richard lingering near Claire's desk, his smile too tight, his tone too casual. Was he fishing for information? Did he know about the memo? I watched from my office, my door slightly ajar. Claire handled him with her usual professionalism, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. When Richard left, I called her in again. "Did he say anything strange?" I asked. She shook her head, but her eyes told a different story. "He asked if I'd seen you today," she said. That was enough to make my skin crawl. That night, I stayed late, the office dark except for the glow of my desk lamp. The memo sat in front of me, its words now a mantra, "He'll be fired soon." I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something obvious. I thought about the company's recent troubles, client losses, stock dips, rumors of a buyout. A firing could be a distraction, a way to shift blame. But who was the target? I pulled out a notepad and jotted down names, crossing them out one by one. Richard was too powerful, Margaret too cunning. Tom, maybe. He'd been off lately, distracted. Or was it someone outside the boardroom, someone I hadn't considered? The memo was a puzzle, and I was running out of pieces. The next morning, I arrived early, determined to get ahead of this. Claire was already at her desk, her face pale but composed. "Anything new?" I asked. She shook her head, but her eyes darted to the executive lounge. I took the hint and headed there, the memo still in my pocket. The lounge was empty, its sleek furniture untouched. I stood where Claire had stood, imagining Richard and Margaret's whispered conversation. What had they said that she hadn't heard? I checked the corners of the room. No cameras, no bugs, just silence. Back at my desk, I found a new email from Richard, vague but urgent. We need to talk. Boardroom, noon. My pulse quickened. Was this about the memo? Or was I walking into a trap? Noon came too quickly. The boardroom was full again, the same faces, the same tension. Richard stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. I clutched the memo in my pocket, its words a lifeline. He started talking about changes and tough decisions, his eyes scanning the room. I watched Margaret, who was unusually quiet, her hands folded tightly. Tom was sweating, his tie loosened. Was he the one? Richard's speech was vague, but the subtext was clear. Someone was on the chopping block. I glanced at Claire through the glass. She was watching from her desk, her face unreadable. The memo felt heavier now, its warning louder. I needed to act, but how? Confronting Richard in front of everyone was risky, but waiting might be worse. The meeting ended without a clear answer, just more questions. Richard pulled me aside as the others left, his grip on my arm too tight. We need to align on some things, he said, his voice low. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Back in my office, I called Claire in again. What do you know about Richard's plans? I asked. She hesitated, then admitted she'd heard rumors of a board shakeup. Nothing concrete, she said, but people are nervous. I pressed her for details, but she clammed up, her loyalty torn. The memo was still my only solid clue, and it wasn't enough. I needed to dig deeper, maybe talk to Tom or Margaret directly. But every move felt like stepping into a minefield. By late afternoon, I cornered Tom in the break room, his coffee cup trembling in his hand. You've been off, I said, keeping my voice low. He flinched, his eyes darting to the door. Just stress, he muttered, but his voice cracked. I pressed him, mentioning the memo without showing it. His face paled, and he mumbled something about deadlines before brushing past me. The memo in my pocket felt like a live wire. Tom was hiding something, but was he the target? I thought about Margaret next. She'd been too quiet in the boardroom, her usual sharpness muted. If she was plotting with Richard, she'd be careful, but I could read her tells. The memo had turned me into a hunter, and I was closing in on the truth. That evening, I stayed late, the office a maze of shadows. The memo sat on my desk, its words a constant drumbeat. He'll be fired soon. I pulled up Tom's recent projects on my computer. Sloppy work, missed targets, nothing catastrophic but enough to make him vulnerable. Was that why Claire had written the note? Or was it bigger, tied to the rumors of a buyout? I thought about the boardroom, Richard's smug control, Margaret's calculated silence. The memo was a warning, but it was also a weapon. I needed to talk to Claire again, but she'd left early, her desk eerily tidy. My paranoia grew. Had she set me up to find the memo? I was in deep, and the stakes were climbing. The next morning, I found a new note from Claire, slipped under my office door. Cafe, 7:30 a.m. urgent. My pulse spiked as I grabbed the original memo and headed out. The cafe was nearly empty, just the hum of the espresso machine. Claire sat in the back, her face tight with worry. It's Tom, she whispered, glancing around. They're firing him to send a message. I leaned in, demanding details. She'd overheard Richard and Margaret in the executive lounge again, talking about cleaning house before a major deal. Tom was the first, but not the last. The memo's weight grew heavier. Why tell me? I asked. Her eyes met mine, steady but scared. Because you're next, she said. Back at the office, Claire's words burned in my mind. Me? The memo wasn't just about Tom, it was a warning for me too. I watched Richard closely as he passed my office, his smile too sharp. I pulled up the company's financials, searching for clues about this major deal. There were hints, offshore accounts, vague references to new investors. The memo was a piece of a larger puzzle, one I was only starting to see. I thought about confronting Tom, warning him, but if I was a target, I had to protect myself first. Claire's desk was empty again, her absence a loud warning. The memo had pulled me into a game I didn't fully understand, but I wasn't backing down. At noon, the boardroom was a pressure cooker, every seat filled. Richard stood at the front, his voice smooth but edged with intent. "We're streamlining," he said, his eyes lingering on Tom, then me. My grip tightened on the memo in my pocket. Tom was sweating, his hands fidgeting with his pen. Margaret sat stone-faced, her silence louder than words. The memo's prophecy felt closer than ever. He'll be fired soon. I scanned the room, searching for allies, but every face was a mask. Richard's speech droned on, but I knew what was coming. Tom was the target, and I might be next. I had to act, but how? Subscribe to our channel for the next chapter of this gripping tale. You won't want to miss what happens next.